Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. In this episode I get to interview the fabulous Alexandra Adams, who you may have seen on TV a lot recently. She is the UK's first deaf-blind doctor. So as I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before we go on, do the usual, go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You'll always know when we got new content coming up. Not only that, I'm trying to get to 10,000 subscribers. So every time you do that, every person who does it makes a huge difference. And it also means a big difference to who gets to see this content. As I say, with the Grumpy Gits this last week, I got to interview the amazing Alexandra Adams, the UK's first deaf-blind doctor. Now, Alexandra was kind enough to come on the Grumpy Gits, and we have to condense that down to about 15-20 minutes to fit in the show. So what we sometimes do is put the whole of the interview on this because there was so much fabulous stuff that Alexandra had to say, especially with regards to her travels. It was just hilarious. So all the content's on here, so please enjoy. And big shout out to Alexandra and a thank you.
Duncan, random question. Who do you think would win in a fight? Doctor Who, Doctor Strange, the band Doctor Hook, or our next guest?
I'm going for our next guest because the determination from our next guest far outweighs any of the magic powers and time traveling capabilities or dodgy 70s style music that would possibly affect anything.
And there's also a Dr. Link as well, isn't there? Because I am good at segues. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alexandra. Hey!
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you guys.
It's always a pleasure to hear other people's stories and get to know them. And I've always said this podcast aims to be a light-hearted and a beacon of hope in a dark, dark world full of parties and Sue Gray reports. And let's move on so effing quickly.
Oh, so topical.
I know. Date stamping everything since 1985. Alexandra, for our wonderful viewers and listeners, who are you? Why are you here? Who is Alexandra? What is Alexandra? And I'll go one better. Why is Alexandra?
I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I'm the UK's first deafblind person training to be a doctor, so then that might be one reason. But I think along the way, my journey's kind of, gone out into so many different angles. I talk about all sorts of things, really, not just being a medical student, but being a disabled person in general society. And kind of my story just kind of went out there, and here we are. We're having this chat. So
I stumbled across you because there was a story in the Independent about you, which I read with really great interest because I find stories like yours remarkably inspiring, also incredibly frustrating because you see the hurdles you've had to cross to get where you are. And I'm not just talking about the obvious hurdle of being deaf-blind and training to be a doctor, but the societal hurdles that get thrown in the way as well. I mean, where did it start for you?
My journey kind of started back in, I'd probably say 2019, actually, in terms of my story getting out there. I obviously went through many hurdles of, applying to medical school, getting into medical school. But it wasn't until I was in my third year of clinical placement, and it was my first day on the wards, really looking forward to it like anybody else in med school was. And the first doctor I came up to, sort of came across, basically just looked me in the eye and just said, "Imagine you're a patient. Would you want a disabled doctor treating you? Absolutely not." And then they sent me home within half an hour of me being there. And I came away and thinking that, oh my, and I was almost half expecting some discrimination to happen because at the end of the day, there's no one else that's kind of done this. But I didn't expect it to kind of hit me in that way. And I came home and I just thought, well, that's just ignorance, isn't it? And I was trying to think of a way to address this incident, but in a positive way. Yep. And I think that's when I started doing a lot of public speaking and just kind of speaking up about it, kind of, besides the passive aggressiveness I wanted to make it a positive message and say, hey, look, there's a lot of learning that we still need to do. And I just got messaged about potentially doing a TED Talk. And at that point, I'm embarrassed to say, I didn't even know what a TED Talk was. I was just kind of living in my little hole, you know. And and then before you know it, sort of in the autumn of 2019, I'm doing a TED Talk on the stage for TEDx NHS. And from there, it kind of just blew up, really, but in a good way. You know, the Sunday Times wrote an article, and I spoke on Lorraine, and I started doing lots of talks at kind of medical conferences, and just kind of trying to really open up the conversation about being a disabled person in not just the healthcare field, but any field, and how actually we need to break down the whole idea of just ticking the box to say that we're not discriminating and we're including people with disabilities, because that just makes life so much more difficult and just complicated. And so I just kind of naturally fell into that kind of advocate role. But it was during the pandemic, and obviously I won't go into it so much so early on, but my life changed, and I was in hospital for 17 months as a patient. And so obviously in that time, I very much went off the radar, went very quiet. You know, there were times where I was kind of just juggling life and death, you know, which is difficult to talk about. But, you know, I've somehow come out the other end. And at the beginning of this year, I was almost faced with the likely possibility of me never being able to go back to medical school. And I thought, no, I can't. I've got this far. There must be a way of me going back. And besides, people know me as, you know, being a deafblind medic. They want to see me graduate now.
Yeah. Well, the thing that gets me with that is, from your story there, you've answered the question from that person who is, you know, obviously saying, you know, would you want a disabled person to treat you as a doctor? I think you've answered the question just in that response, because for me, it's something. My wife's in hospital today, funnily enough. She's having a surgery today. Not funnily, but you know what I mean. Surgery. But the fact that she's in there, she wanted a doctor that understands what she's going to go through. Yeah. I don't think you can have a better person to treat you than somebody who has to navigate the system on a daily basis, who has faced life and death, has been through these things. Surely, to me, especially for, I mean, you know, if you just want to bring it down to one group of society, for other deaf, blind people, knowing that the doctor is somebody who has not just an empathy, but a sympathy, an experience of it, to me would be a big benefit.
Yeah, and I say this a lot, and I think it's very hard for people who aren't in the medical profession to understand this, but really you don't need all the hearing or the vision in the world to be a good doctor, a good nurse, you know, a good paramedic. You literally just have to have that ability to connect with people at a very human level. Giving an example, and it was in placement, so it was in the same year that I got this comment from this other doctor. And we were on this really quite a big award round. And as a medical student, I was obviously at the very back because, you know, talk about hierarchy in the NHS. And from where I was stood, I could not hear or see this patient. And I think you guys would understand this, but, you know, I kind of got a sixth sense. I think we kind of have these extra senses to compensate for whatever we don't have. And I was just standing there and thinking, something's not right with this patient. I feel like she needs to say something, but she's not able to. Ironically, the doctors didn't really look or listen, and we just kind of moved on to the next patient. And it was this point that I go to the consultant and I said, look, do you mind just speaking a little bit louder, please? Because I've got hearing aids. And he just kind of looked at me like in a really quite a nasty way. And after we'd seen this patient, he just walks off and he said to his colleague, how do you expect an invalid like her to work in ES? And I heard what he said, and I could have gone after him and said, look, I heard what you just said about me, you know, can you just clarify? But I decided it wasn't worth it, because you are going to get people like that. No matter how much you educate them, they are just going to be, excuse the pun, they're going to be deaf and blind, they're going to be ignorant. And I went back to this patient who I'd got this sixth sense about, and I just asked her 3 really important words, and I just said, are you okay? And she burst into tears and she said no. And long story short, she had just come down to the ward from being in intensive care. And I knew personally how that felt, because I've been in ICU 23 times now. And I was able to sit down and say, look, I know what you're going through, you know, ABC, it's going to be okay, things will get better, etc. You know, just trying to kind of direct her in ways that will be able to help her. You know, just an extra 5 minutes at her bedside. I didn't need any hearing, I didn't need any vision. All I needed was that empathy and understanding. And I think, you know, people coming from the general public, they do say things, or how can you possibly communicate with your patients, or how can you possibly, you know, see to take blood, etc. But and I will go on to that actually, you know, how I actually do things. But I've always said that, you know, I might not have had much eyesight than most people, but I have more insight than many. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, Duncan. I think insight is so important, and we have a lot of it. That's our superpower.
That really is. I used to, back when I lived in Australia, a good friend of mine was a doctor, and he used to get me to come in, and he was a training doctor. So what he would do is train other doctors to become doctors. And he was very big on the empathy side of things. And one of the things that he used to do was bring me in as a fake patient to his students, and I'd had to feign some form of whatever, and I'd have notes on how to act. And it was a group of us used to go in, but you had notes on how to, you might want to be really angry. So, you know, you're just really angry and responding badly and you're in pain. So and it was getting them to cut through the medical side of it and get to that empathy. And he saw that as being one of the key things for any GP. And it really got to me. And it's something that stuck with me that I always look for. And I think that what you're doing is bringing that in at an experiential level. And you can't buy that kind of, you know, involvement.
And that leads me on to my next question is, how do we get there? As someone who also knows the system well, how do we take medicine from where it currently is, which is very much a problem solution model, and make it a more human model where we realize we're dealing with people and not conditions, problems, mistakes, and numbers?
Absolutely. I mean, even when I was a patient recently, you know, there were so many times, too many times, in fact, that I really just felt like a bed number and nothing else. And, you know, I think people, and I don't know whether it's the system, the stresses of the system, but we do forget that patients are human at the end of the day. And I think if you have that experience on the side, you are able to then, you're able to realize more that actually this person is a lot more than just whatever, you know, they've come in for, or in the hospital bed. And I think it does just come back down to communication, and it's crazy, but we don't get a lot of that in medical school, certainly not now anyway.
Is that because of the way the NHS is at the moment? I was talking with my mother-in-law last night, and we were talking about This Is Going to Hurt, the TV series that was on BBC One recently. Yeah. And that whole thing of, you know, he's done a 12-hour shift, he's gone out for a drink, he gets called back in. He was already almost falling asleep at the wheel on the way home, and yet they're dragged in. Is part of that empathy, that lack of empathy, and that treating everyone as a number, because there's literally just so much overwhelming need that you can't almost take the time to dial it down and spend that essential time with each patient.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to hurt. I mean, I'm friends with Adam Kay, actually. I mean, the book was hilarious, but I don't think, as NHS staff, none of us were expecting it to be that dark when we watched it. But to be honest, it's so accurate, it's so applicable, and it's sad. But it was also very, again, excuse the pun, but it was very eye-opening, because this is the state. I mean, this was recorded, 10, 20 years ago, as in, like, you know, based on his experiences. Yeah. And that is just the nature of how it is. But it's to no one's fault of their own. It's a systemic issue. Yeah. And it does come back down to the whole kind of concept of, you know, we're looking after patients, but no one's looking after us. And then you do have the things, you know, like forgetting that staff are human, forgetting that staff have disabilities, they have health conditions, they have, you know, mental health problems, they have, you know, issues going on at home, and
they have lives.
There's so many things. We try to have lives anyway. But it is, and I think a lot of it is very much invisible. I think that's why there's been so much uproar and kind of questioning around my journey, because no one's ever, there isn't another deafblind medic, at least in the UK. And, I think suddenly people just think, oh, doctors are these robots, they're these perfect species. And I mean, I've recently started going on TikTok, which is kind of where it kind of all exploded, and one went viral because I was like, I'm going to break down the myths and the misconceptions of being a deafblind medic. And there was this one person that commented and said, oh, she's more ill than her patients. And I was like, you have no idea. Like, just look at these people, okay, they're wearing scrubs or they're wearing uniform, but they're people, they're human. And so I did a little bit of a video response just saying that actually underneath it all, we are people that use wheelchairs or have stomas or are fighting or surviving cancer, have mental health difficulties, have lost, family and friends, and the list goes on. And it's just, we really lost the humane, aspect in healthcare, which is so ironic to say, but it's true.
Do you think that if there were more disabled people within the NHS and the wider medical system, but in positions of power and influence, to be able to kind of not only call out the bullshit, because it's one thing calling out bullshit, but then do something about it, like take it from mere lip service and, oh, let's have a panel about disability with no disabled people on it. June Sarpong, I'm looking at you, BBC bullshit. Sorry, I have issues. And actually go and then do something about it, rather than having the same conversation every year.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think, unfortunately, I mean, there are a lot of organisations and institutions that are actively working on improving kind of disability access and inclusion with people with disabilities, but I think a lot of people, including the NHS, it's not just them, but in general, I think at the moment anyway, disability is still very much a tick box exercise, which can be really dangerous. And I think a lot of people just tick the box to say, oh, hey, we've included this person because they come in the minority and we've done our bit, and that's that. And it's all for show.
This very topic came up in Adam and Simon interviewed Martin Dugan from Newsround, who's obviously a wheelchair user, and he was saying the same thing at the BBC. Everything is such a tick boxing exercise, and what is supposed to be something that is creating inclusion is almost doing the opposite. It's becoming a barrier, which is really strange.
And I think because of the tick box kind of aspect, people they assume that someone with one disability has the same challenges or strengths or weaknesses or whatever as someone else with that same disability, and it's just so wrong. I mean, again, I have this question every day as someone who's deafblind. It doesn't mean that I'm completely deaf and completely blind. It's a spectrum, and you have to keep explaining yourself. It's the same thing, again, on one of my TikTok videos, I explained that it's like if you're a wheelchair user, it depends on, the level of paralysis. Not all people are paralyzed. They use it for other reasons like fatigue. And the list goes on. And I think as soon as you do that tick box exercise, you're right. You're just shoving them in a box on one sort of criteria, so to speak. That the adjustments might not be appropriate for everyone in that box. I obviously use this as another example when it comes to the whole discrimination in tick box exercises. But before I ended up in Cardiff Medical School, I got an offer from another medical school, whose name I won't mention at this point. Qualified. Yeah.
Very smart. Yeah, let's avoid lawsuits.
When I'm a doctor, trust me. I essentially got this offer, and I went up to this medical school 5 times between getting my offer and my results. And I said time and time again, are you sure you're happy to take me on? Are you sure you're happy to have me as a disabled medical student? Because I knew that, from the day one, that it was going to be an additional challenge to most other people. And they kept saying time and time again, yes, everything's absolutely fine. We're, all the support's in place. We're ready to have you. And I thought, great. And then I got higher grades than what they'd, sort of put in the conditional offer in the summer. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've actually done it. And I was so over the moon. It was just the best feeling in the world. And then it was the week before moving into accommodation. So you can imagine someone going off to uni. I had all the crockery, all the clothes, all the, the furniture, whatever, lined up in the hallway, ready to leave. And I got a phone call from this medical school one evening, just out of the blue. And they just said, we changed our mind. We can't have you anymore because you've got disabilities. And just like that, put the phone down. And I never heard from this medical school again. I had basically been accepted because they ticked the box at interview to say, we've interviewed this disabled person. And as soon as I'm theirs, they can pretty much do anything they wanted. And in this case, they basically discarded me before I'd even started. Growing up, I always kind of had this idea that, inclusivity, it would improve, ableism would decrease. The older you get and the more you're in the adult world, things will become easier. But oh boy, I was so wrong. It's the other way around. And I think that was kind of the first brick in the face when I realized that, wow, even top educational institutions can basically just do so much wrong.
I'd have taken to the cleaners.
Yeah.
They'd have been straight on the fucking one show, is where they'd have been. And you talk about the system a lot, and I find the system deeply frustrating because very similar things happen in the media where they put all these like schemes in place and tick boxes, and then they pat themselves on the back and are like, oh, aren't you grateful? I'm like, no, I'm not grateful for you doing what you legally should have been this entire time. Are you not embarrassed?
It's all for show, and it's so frustrating on our part because, I think you get that kind of mixture of emotions because you feel like you have to be grateful, like you were saying, Adam, but actually it's just, deep down inside, you're still feeling so resentful because that this is not how it works. It's not really as relatable an example, but this year in Strictly Come, I think it was this year or last year, I forget what time of year it was now, but Strictly Come Dancing, Rose Ayling Ellis, she's deaf, but she obviously ultimately went on to winning it. And then I think there was kind of this major explosion in the media about how we should be using BSL, which is sign language, in the media. But it was great, but it also really frustrated me as someone who's also deaf to think that, it has to take someone who's very well known, who has that particular disability, for them to suddenly think, oh, maybe we should use BSL. Well, I'm sorry, they should have been doing it 10, 15 years ago to make it kind of a standard point of access for deaf people who watch the telly. And it's just, again, it just goes back to that whole kind of concept of it's all for show, and look at us, look what we're doing. We're making a massive step forward, but actually we've been waiting for these adjustments for years.
It took the government 6 months to get a British Sign Language interpreter at the COVID briefings during the pandemic. I did a lot of swearing on Twitter for those 6 months. And I even learned Boris Johnson to go back yourself in sign language and put a video of that up on there. But that's a whole other angry kettle of very angry fish. But yeah, and it just, I always say disability, you don't get it till you get it.
But there's this attitude, I think, that's prevalent, which is people should be thankful for what should have been being done all along. It's like talking to a murderer and saying, well, he stopped killing me, so I should be thankful to him that he spared me. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. Like, the whole thing is just so out of whack.
That's like me going to my girlfriend, I'm not sexist, you're welcome.
Oh my goodness.
I've heard some of the things you said, Adam. That is not true.
Those are ex-girlfriends, Duncan. I've learned. I've changed
from your mistakes. I understand.
I've changed. I've not bought this on an ironing board for Christmas.
See, I could go so much further with just not being rude, but being understandably angry with so many things that we talk about. But I think because of the position I'm in, being a medical student who's going to qualify as a doctor at some point, I got to be so careful with what I say. And I feel so silenced a lot of the time because, I could be like Adam and just go ranting on Twitter. But I can't do it.
How
Not yet, anyway.
Alexandra, how I've not been cancelled is beyond me. The things I have said.
I wasn't really sure whether to use this, but to have it on show. But I went to make my my cup of coffee this morning, and I normally drink it out of this mug. I don't know if you can read it. I was like, maybe I shouldn't have it on the podcast because they might think I'm really rude. But I actually had a doctor friend who sent me this, and it's just so applicable as a disabled person, patient, as a medical student. I just thought this would be ideal. I'll just put my coffee in here and just start, casually spreading the message.
I love
via
it.
The podcast.
It's like a hybrid of Rage Against the Machine and My Little Pony in one mug. That's perfect. On that, I want to ask, going on for a bit of a different tangent, what's the funniest situation you've been presented with as a result of all this?
Oh, so in medicine or in general? Like, because
either or both.
I don't know what's like. And I also want to know what's the dumbest thing anyone said to you.
I mean, I must have a book on the dumb things. I mean, just go on TikTok and just see the comments. Like, some people would be like, how does she communicate? Like, how does she speak as a deaf person? I'm like, isn't me speaking to you on this TikTok video enough evidence to show that I speak, like anybody else? And, it's just some things are just really, really dumb. But in terms of funny things, I mean, before the pandemic anyway, I enjoyed traveling a lot on my own, and people are like, oh my gosh, how do you do that as a deafblind person? But to be honest, I much prefer traveling solo than going with anyone else, but obviously the ultimate, conclusion is that I do get lost in forests. I've ended up on the hard shoulder of a motorway in Hong Kong by accident.
Oh,
don't even
wow.
ask how I managed to get on there. But anyway, I think I was flying from Hong Kong to Kuala Lumpur or something. I was doing kind of I was on AirAsia, and I'd obviously had asked for flight assistance because I can't see where to go, like what gate to go to, to get onto the plane, etc. I don't always hear the announcements. And so, I booked assistance. And I think I don't know whether, again, it was a cultural thing or whatever, it was just misunderstanding. But I think as soon as you tick the box to say, I need assistance, I've got a disability, I need help, they immediately assume that you're in a wheelchair. And obviously, so I rocked up at the desk and they came with this wheelchair. And I was like, oh, no, I can walk. It's just I can't see or hear. And they said, no, you need to sit in the wheelchair. And I just kind of said, there's nothing wrong with my legs. Like, it's just, I need to be able to see where I'm going. And they said, if you don't get in the wheelchair, we can't give you assistance. And I was thinking, oh my gosh. And it infuriated me because I knew I didn't need it. So I just thought, well, it's either that or I don't get on the plane. So I very reluctantly got into the wheelchair and they pushed me all the way to the gate. And they parked me against a wall. Obviously, I couldn't see anything. Oh, not that I would be able to see much anyway, but it was like I would have been able to kind of just look out the window at least. And and I just said to them, I said, oh, do you mind? I'm just going to go to the toilet before my flight. And they said, oh, okay, no, we'll get you assistance. I said, no, I'm fine. I can go to the toilet on my own, thank you. And they said, oh, no, we need to get you help. And I was just thinking to myself, this is just going to be a disaster. So I kind of waited till they kind of just left my side and went back to the desk. And I legged it. I got out of the wheelchair and I started running with my cane, like full speed, across the, the airport, across the gate. And all these people were looking at me like, what is this blind person doing? Like running, she looked like she's just making a run for it, which I was. Managed to find the toilet. And, after everyone was running after me and sort of had my moment of peace and when I came back out and I just kind of casually walked back to the gate, I could just about make out where it was. And I'd given the very clear evidence that I could walk, in fact, run absolutely fine. So I didn't need this wheelchair. And yet they ushered, over to me and was all faffing around. They said, oh my gosh, you're going to fall over. They shoved me back in this wheelchair and they hoisted me onto the plane. And I was just like, I was mortified. I was just like, have I not given you enough evidence that I just needed someone just to guide me onto the plane.
You should have done, praise Jesus, I'm healed. Got up and then started running and watched everyone's reactions.
I
For the entire flight, I had to live with the embarrassment of people thinking she's probably just like, I don't know what. Do you know what I mean? People probably thinking that I'm just completely faking everything, and I was just asking for it, and it was humiliating. It really, really was.
I'm faking it. This takes 8 hours.
Well, do you know, I've been out and about, and people have genuinely asked me what the cane is, and you know, it's been sort of mistaken as. I mean, when I was where was I? Malaysia. A young lad came up to me and said, "Oh, is that a lightsaber or saber from Star Wars?" And I was like, "No, no." And then I was on a beach another time, and someone else came up to me and said, "Oh, are you looking for treasure?" As if it was a metal detector, and I was like, "No." And but then people also think that, you know, it's like when I started uni in freshers year, I did go out a few times and just, you know, enjoyed the nightlife and stuff. And people, you know, when they've had a little bit of alcohol, they will take my cane and they'll think it as a prop, so it's fancy dress, or they'll start, oh, I've got to tell you this story. So I was in, sorry, I'm going off tangent, but you'll find
it's all fine.
So I was in Thailand, and I was in a night market, and I met up with a few other backpackers, and obviously they were kind of like looking around the stalls. And I think after a few pina coladas and stuff, they'd, you know, slowly forgotten that I can't actually see. And I'm night blind, so at night time, I really cannot see anything at all. And so I turn around and I've lost the crew. And I think, oh, it's fine, don't worry, you know, I've done this before. And so I just kind of go towards where like the music is, you know, like everything's vibrating and you're thinking, yeah, it's getting louder, so people must be in this area. And I kept, you know, going more and more towards the music. And then my cane hits the bottom of what felt like a step. And I thought, oh, what's this? And the music's getting louder. And I just kind of go up the steps thinking maybe this is a platform. Maybe they'll be able to see me and, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden, someone just grabs my cane and starts swinging around it. Then before I know it, they're dancing with me. And I'm twirling around and I'm on the stage of a ladyboy show in front of all you. And they're pole dancing with my cane. They literally.
Oh, that's genius. I've got to try that. I just got to do it so I can get backstage at gigs.
And I was still oblivious at this point until everyone started cheering and clapping. And I was like, what on earth is going on? Where is everyone?
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
If this doctor shit doesn't work out.
It's always good to have other career choices in the background.
We now know you have a fallback, right?
The stuff I've got into on my travels is just, it's almost like I'm cursed, but in a funny way. Like every time, I mean, when I went out to America, kind of a last minute thing in 2017 in search of blind and deaf doctors, because this is when I kind of was starting to get the discrimination in medical school, and I wanted to find out how they could support me better as a deafblind medic. And so I just went out to New York and then San Francisco in search of blind and deaf doctors. And I met 5 completely blind doctors and 1 completely deaf doctor. And it was the most, I know we overuse this word a lot, but it was inspiring, it was eye-opening. And I came home with a lot of kind of deep, meaningful life messages and the kind of a can-do attitude. Mm-hmm. But I had 1 day off between sort of working in the hospitals and stuff. And so I was in San Francisco at the time, and I decided to go to this forest, you know, because, you know, just enjoy the trees and whatnot, which was such a stupid thing to do in hindsight, because, you know, anyone, sight or no sight, naturally it's quite easy to get lost. But this is a national forest. It was huge. And all there was a tiny little hut, which kind of had the information and the maps and stuff. And I sort of rocked up and I said, oh, hey, do you have any like tactile maps or audio maps or, you know, something to help me find my way around? They said, no, we don't. But if you just follow the wooden kind of path, you should be fine. It just goes round in one big circle. But I was just getting so like engrossed and fascinated by nature around me. Kind of 10, 15 minutes in, I realised that I was climbing up the soil, and I was just in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't find where the wooden plank was or anything. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, where am I? And I thought I saw someone, and I just kind of, called over. I said, oh, excuse me, I'm a little bit lost. Can you just point me in the right direction? And obviously they didn't respond. And I was like, well, how rude. And I realised I was talking to a tree trunk.
At least it wasn't a bear.
That's not the funny bit. Honestly, it was, but there was no one else around to judge me, so it was fine. I was like, oh, ha, ha. I managed to get to the exit, and after having a little stroll around the forest, and then I just said to them, I said, oh, do you have any Wi-Fi? Because I need to book like an Uber or something. And they just laughed at me, and they said, you do realise we're in the middle of nowhere, and the only way people really came to this national forest was if they were part of a kind of a multi-destination coach tour, and I was not on a coach tour. I just kind of just rocked out of nowhere, like I do with most things. Yeah, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm stranded. Long story short, I've never done this before, but I ended up kind of hitchhiking. But this family had kind of seen me, and they said, look, we're driving down to Sausalito, would you like a lift? I said, thank you so much. I mean, for all I know, they could have been murderers, but thankfully they weren't. But I got out of the car, they dropped me off. I said, thank you so much. I'll make the rest of my way home. And the people I was staying with, it was my last day, and I wanted to buy some flowers. So I was kind of like just going up and down this very busy road, but hadn't realised that most of the shops were closed at this time, because it was like 5 o'clock in the evening. And I found Google Maps was telling me that there's a florist nearby, and I found it. And thank goodness for that. And I opened the door thinking it was the entrance to this florist. Didn't realise that it was kind of like this really big refrigerator with all the cool plants in there. And so I walk into this refrigerator and the door shuts, and I'm just kind of locked in this refrigerator. Oh. And then the owner of the florist, she comes out, she said, what on earth are you doing? Who are you? Oh my God, I'm going to call the police. Because she was closed. The florist was closed. I hadn't realised. Wow. I had broken into a florist. I'm so sorry. Look, I have the cane. I'm blind. I didn't realise. I mean, I think when she saw it, she realised. She said, oh, that's fine. But then I spent the next hour tediously having to listen to her describe every tiny little detail of every single petal of every single bunch of flowers. I just went in just to buy a simple bouquet. I did come out with the flowers in the end, but oh my God.
I mean, I lost my mind. I was like, it's a cactus, love. We got it. We got it. Spikes, green, shit. Yeah, we're there.
It was, yeah. I don't even know how I get myself into these situations, Adam. Honestly, it's just.
Is it that spirit of adventure? Like, you seem like somebody who wants to get out there and do stuff, and is it that spirit of adventure that's prompted this? That, was part of that decision to go, you know what, I'm going to be a doctor and fuck everybody else. Was that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a kind of a go-getter attitude, and I think also being visually and hearing impaired, I almost don't have that fear factor when it comes to, oh, but what if this happens, or what if you bump into this, or. But I don't have it because I don't see, literally, I don't see what's up ahead of me. So I do just, I mean, my friends call me Bridget Jones. I do just get myself into these situations. But I think, I've always said I want to see the world before the world goes blind, because like with technology, and I mean, that's a brilliant thing. And, it's helped me so much in medicine. But I think, when it comes to things like smartphones and just so much of that, we just stop paying attention to the world around us. And it goes back to the whole thing where you don't actually need to physically see or hear that to appreciate it.
There was that scene in Ocean's 11. I always come back to this because I think we're guilty of it all the time. But it's where they're in Vegas and they're blowing up the building behind. It's Don Cheadle in the hotel room. And they're destroying this building. And you see it out of the window falling. but he's sitting there watching it on TV, and it's like, that is life. That is what we do so much.
Yeah. It's just brilliant. It's brilliant. I would love to kind of share more of my experiences of just that go-getter attitude, just doing stuff, without even thinking about it, just going out there and experiencing things. But again, because of my role as a medical student, it's difficult, because I think if I was just a medical student and I wasn't deafblind or I didn't have disabilities, I could say anything and everything. But because I have that additional kind of, well, I'm deafblind, I think people suddenly think, oh, well, if you do that, that's not funny, because that's really quite dangerous. Whereas if it was someone without those impairments, they would be absolutely fine. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm very kind of wary and conscious when it comes to sharing the comical side of my life normally. So I'm loving this chat, because I can just talk about all the, like, honestly, the stupid and naive things I have done.
Whenever I get in trouble, I'm like, I'm disabled. I don't know any better. So move on. I once accidentally took a job in Slovakia.
Yeah. Oh, check that. Yeah. I think people who don't have disabilities or experiences of illness and etc., they see us as not being able to have fun. Do you know what I mean? And I think they always, it's such a taboo. They don't talk about it, and then when you say, like, when Adam's talking about his stories, and you're like, that is absolutely hilarious. If that was someone else, they'd be like, oh, I don't know whether to laugh or not, because is that an insult, or is that supposed to happen? Are disabled people meant to have fun? And I get a lot of that, and it's just
I revel in that awkwardness.
Yeah,
I love it, and I keep it going as well. I'm like, oh, you think you feel awkward now? Wait till I respond to what you're saying. When I talk about my girlfriend, people are like, you have a girl? Do you and your girlfriend kind of what? Do me and my girlfriend go cycling? Like, no.
I saw a TV. There's a TV show back in Australia called The Money or the Gun, and this guy he did an episode on disability. This is way back in the 80s, and he did an episode on disability and stuff. And one of my favorite guys I've ever seen interviewed, this guy was a thalidomide child, obviously grown to an adult, that he had the limb difference that resulted from thalidomide and all the issues that went on with that. And he had an absolutely stunning girlfriend, genuine blonde model, sort of like, every guy would be like, whoa, how did you manage that? And he said one of his favorite things was he'd go cycling with her. Obviously he can't cycle, so he actually just she had a backpack, and she's with the backpack on, and he'd sit in the backpack. And what he'd do is he'd wait till they pulled up at traffic lights, and he'd duck down. He'd put the cover on the hood thing on the backpack, and he'd duck down. And he'd wait till they were up against, like a group of young lads in the car. He'd see her on the bike in the Lycra, and hey, baby, how you doing? The usual. And he'd pop out. What the fuck are you looking at, you bastards? And just watch these guys completely freak out.
Oh, that's
what a legend. That is exactly what I'd be doing.
I was speaking to she's another blind person, actually. She's kind of up and coming, and she's been doing some sort of social media stuff to raise awareness of being a blind person. She's called Claire Sisk. I'm not sure how to pronounce her surname, actually, but she, oh my gosh, some of the things she's put up are hilarious, because she said, someone asked me, well, how do blind people have sex? But honestly, some people, like, well, how else do you think? We just turn the lights off like anyone else.
Alexandra, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I have been riveted. There's so much we can discuss. And what we're going to do is, as we've done with other great interviews like this, we've obviously got to edit this to a format that we can fit into the show and bring it down. There's so much more to the interview that you've missed if you're watching this in the Grumpy Gits. So please head over now. We'll put a link in the description. There'll be a card pop up here. You can get straight over there, and you can check out the rest of the interview, because there's so much more that Alexandra talks about.
So much good stuff. She robbed the florist. Well, Alexandra, thank you for coming and talking to us, and for all your wonderful stories and wonderful insights. We'll we'll let you go before one of us kills the other with laughter. If people want to know more about you or follow you on the socials, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram and Twitter, Alexandra Elaine Adams. I'm sorry, not Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, Alexandra Elaine Adams, and then Twitter, Alexandra_DBmed. But I've got all my links on. If you go to my Instagram bio, I've got a link tree in there which has everything.
We will put your link tree in the description.
I think that's a good idea.
Go check it out straight away.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys.
It's been a pleasure.
So that was Alexandra Adams, and how awesome is she? I think it was one of the most entertaining interviews I've done in quite some time. She's an absolute legend. Please do go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell, and you'd always know when I've got new content coming up. I will see you again on the next show, but in the meantime, please stay safe.